Hey everyone, welcome to an incredibly low rent chess video. My name is Kirby and I am bad at this game, but I'm trying to get better. So the idea here is I'm going to play some rapid games on Lichess and then I will analyze them on video. Uh, and the analysis, you can hear my cat in the background, has a dual purpose of hopefully incentivizing me to play more games because I am now sort of beholden to an audience. And also to analyze games because while I'm on my own, I don't typically go over the games in the ways that you should in order to improve at chess. So let's just get into it. I played in 1800 on Lichess just a few hours ago, and I thought that um, it would make sense to analyze it and see if I can learn something because, like I said, that's not really my MO. Um, my MO is more to sort of click the pieces around the board at random. So here we go. I started with e4, as I always do with white. C5, the Sicilian defense. I like to play an open Sicilian, hopefully the Najdorf, but I haven't really found much luck with close Sicilian or Grand Prix structures, although I've tried them. I prefer a more fighting open game, even though my theory is not as sound as it should be if you want to play such an opening. So he goes e6 here, and I don't really know what to do after e6, which is bad because it's a very normal move. But I sort of just play the same system that I play regardless of what Sicilian I am confronted with, and that is uh, the French attack against the Najdorf. So I go d5, open Sicilian, takes, and he plays this move a6. Now, I don't think e6 and a6 are really the best combo. Apparently, there is a name for this opening. I looked it up on Lichess, but I can't remember what it is. I certainly don't know the theory of it, so I just played it like it was an Najdorf with d6, a6, and I play bishop to e3. He then goes d6, and I think this is. I was happy to see this move. It seems slow to me. He's not developing anything. This pawn is probably just going to be a long-term weakness. This bishop and knight are going to be tough to get out, I think, with any kind of conviction, and it gives me plenty of time to develop. So I play knight to c3. He responds with queen to c7, which I typically don't like to see in Sicilian structures because I think the queen does a lot of good work along this diagonal, which I typically do not contest because, like I said, I like to play this move bishop to e3 against the Sicilian. And since I don't have any knight jumps here, I can't attack the queen on this square. And the queen puts a lot of pressure down the c file, and I like to castle queenside. And so it necessitates me castling queenside and then probably playing king to b1 if they're able to line up this queen rook battery, which is one of the main ideas against the open Sicilian when your opponent castles queenside. So I play queen to d2, just developing, setting up castling queenside. This is just my normal setup against the Najdorf. I think it works at least okay against a lot of Sicilian openings, especially at my noob level. Bishop d7 is played by my opponent, and that move doesn't scare me at all. It gives me, I think, basically a free development move. Normally, I think people play knight f6 here, forcing f3, but we basically transpose into that anyway because I get my bishop out, threatening now to castle either way, depending on what they do, but I was never really going to castle kingside because I like castling queenside in these structures. And so I play f3, which is an unnecessary move to stop the knight going here. Although my bishop was also defending that square, it also helps propel the pawns forward in the eventual pawn storm, which I like to at least attempt against against the Sicilian. Now, I want to note that although this is a 15 plus 10 game, 15 minutes with 10 seconds of bonus time for every move, we're basically playing these moves instantly. I think my opponent has more time than he started with at this point, and I have, I think, a little less than I started with, but I'm not really thinking at this point, which probably isn't ideal. So my opponent castles, and I castle. So again, my main ideas are going to be pawn storm here. I think he's got to get his pieces out, line up the queen rook battery, put some pressure on c6, and so he starts to do that with knight to c6. Excuse me, put pressure on c3. He plays knight to c6, and at this point, I know that it's time to pawn storm. All my pieces are developed. I like this setup a lot. I like this battery working against the king side, putting a lot of pressure here. I'm never really concerned about taking this knight because I can take back with the bishop or even the queen in some instances. Um, I really could have played this move king to b1 here, but I didn't really think it was necessary because I didn't see the potential for a lot of pressure along this diagonal. So I play h4. Now, immediately he proves that I probably made a mistake with h4 and I should have instead played g4 because he plays this sort of annoying move, knight h5. So he is threatening knight to g3 to fork the bishop and rook, which would be annoying. I don't want to lose my light square bishop for free, so I am forced to retreat my bishop. And I think this is the beginning of a sequence where he sort of gains the upper hand in a really interesting way, and equalizes with black in a pretty impressive way. So he starts out by taking on d4. I am forced to take back with the queen because if I take back with the bishop, he's just got the same knight fork against the bishop and rook on g3. So I take back with the queen, but this allows him to basically force a queen trade with bishop to f6. I have no choice but to move back. And here he makes a pretty committal decision, which I think is okay. I think he could have held this position, but it's not very ambitious, especially given where his knight is. So he decides to take my knight here. And I could keep queens on the board with pawn takes, but I didn't want to do that in a world. I don't want to weaken my king to that extent in a world where the queens are still on the board. I think he'd have some annoying pressure here with moves like queen to a5. Even if I move my king in that instance, there's a lot of nasty pressure along the a file. He can even start pushing b5, b4, b3, and I don't love my position in that instance. So when he takes, I take back with the queen, and he decides to get queens off the board and ruin my pawn structure, which I think is an okay decision, but this is where the move d6 really sort of looks a little weird because I mean, sure, he can defend with rook with rook to d8 here, but then I can sort of put a lot of pressure with the pawns in the center of the board, and he's got to push, and I can even force like I can even put this on the board. So if he plays here, I can push the pawn, and he can't take because he actually gets mated. So he'd really have to push the pawn here, but then I can play c4 even, and if he pushes, then I can just win the pawn. And the d6 pawn really, I don't know how much my opponent anticipated having to deal with this weakness on d6 once the queens were off the board, because I think it's something that I was able to use to pretty good effect here. So my opponent plays knight to f4, which I found to be a pretty annoying move, although it really is, and that's just because it makes me undevelop my bishop here, which is what I do because he's hitting the bishop and the pawn. So I have to defend the pawn, move back. But now that the knight is here, it doesn't really have a great future. It's staring at a lot of defended squares in my territory. It can't even retreat here because pawn defends it. And so I'm not really sure what his plan is. Perhaps he wants to push like maybe something like this, but then I can take, and then try to kick his knight with a move like g3, and that basically wins me the pawn. So I don't know. I think it was I found it kind of annoying in the moment, but looking back on it, I don't know how practically good knight f4 was. And then he plays h5, which this is the beginning of, I think, a sequence where my opponent sort of started to lose the thread of the game a little bit. He starts playing way too much on the king side, as you're about to see. He's going to move all these pieces multiple times while I'm basically able to achieve the ideal setup that I want, which is um, winning this pawn, doubling rooks on the on the d file, getting my bishop into the game, and even getting rid of my isolated doubled c pawns. So we can see that in this sequence. So I think so. The computer says that I should have taken this pawn right away, but I thought that it would be a decent sequence to put pressure on the knight first, and that way, if he's forced to defend, I can double his pawns and then take. I think this structure is kind of ugly, but I guess what the computer sees is that although these pawns are maybe weak, these two pawns in particular are maybe weak, they are freezing my whole structure in place. And I think that there is something to be said for that. So the computer didn't like my plan of attacking the knight. I think my opponent justified it by moving the knight back into an awful square. I mean, the knight can't go here, the knight can't go here, the knight can't go here, and any of these retreating moves are just brutal. And now the pawn is hanging two different ways, and I'm able to capture it with the rook. Again, trying to execute the plan of doubling rooks on this d file. My opponent plays b5, which I think is a decent move, sort of restricting my bishop. That is the most problematic piece in my position, and I struggle to get it onto a good square after this. So I move it just basically to double up rooks, but the bishop's really not doing anything here. So I think b5 was pretty effective, because if I could have gone here in one go, I think the bishop would have been a lot more dynamic, a lot faster. My opponent plays this move knight to e7, and this is another example of what I'm talking about, where he's moving all his kingside pieces basically to no effect. So he's giving me time, like I said, to execute my plan. I double rooks on the d file, and now I'm dominating the position. I have two rooks on the only open file on the board. My opponent plays g6. If you know what that does, let me know in the comments. I play a3 with the idea of playing c4. I wanted to stop an annoying b4 push. If I hadn't defended this square and I'd played c4, he could have just played. So, for example, if I'd played something like, like if I played c4 right away, he just has b4. And then this pawn is kind of all up in my business, and this bishop is even worse than it was before because it's now surrounded by pawns and light squares. So I play a3 to try to head off that, so I can play c4, get rid of my doubled weakness, and then free my bishop. Plays king to g7. I think he just doesn't have a plan, but what I don't understand is the time usage here, and I think you see this a lot at lower levels on these chess websites. Or these people don't use their time at all, and I don't understand why you'd sign up for 15+10 game if you're not going to use any of your time. But I mean, I'm not blameless in this situation either. We're about to see a situation where I really should have used more time. But my opponent's making it way too easy for me. I'm able to achieve whatever I want. I play c4. He's got to take. I take back. And now this bishop's amazing. This bishop is really good, even though it's staring at some pawns. It's pressuring a lot of weaknesses in the position. This bishop's incredible. My rooks are on an open file. My king is safe. I'm feeling great at this point. So my opponent plays knight to g8, which makes me feel even better. Again, I have no idea where this knight is going or what he's doing. Why hasn't he moved this bishop, this rook? All my pieces have been developed and then some, and these two guys are still on their starting squares. This guy's only moved because he's castled. So I play this check, and I think it probably wasn't the best move. I knew it could be parried with a pawn here, but I wanted to induce this weakness where I could, excuse me. I wanted to induce this weakness where I could pressure both of these pawns with my bishop and rook, and maybe even double up rooks on the sixth rank. And as you can see, that is actually how the game goes. And so I was a little unsure of what to do here. I think pushing the a pawn here, maybe trying to fix this pawn on a light square, would have been a decent idea. Even trying to break through on the king side with g4 right away, I think could have been interesting. But I wanted to soften up the structure a little bit here, and so I induced that weakness. Or I could even make him pin himself, which would have been fine too. But he does play f6, so I move the bishop back, and now the idea is to put pressure on these two pawns. So he defends the pawn that's under attack, which is the e6 pawn. I move my rook to b6 in order to double up on the sixth rank, like I said, putting pressure on both of these pawns. And I think a good idea for him at this point is to just try to get out of dodge with a move um, like e5 here, because at least that pawn isn't weak. Maybe he can play a maneuver like this while I double up, like say here. Actually, he's not in time. I was going to say something like this, but this pawn's already a goner at this point. So I don't know. I mean, it's a tough position, but it's a tough position because he wasted so much time. Plays knight to h6. Again, where's this knight going? I mean, these two squares are taken. Unfortunately, I justify this move with my terrible play later. But I am able to double up rooks on the sixth rank. Like I said, I'm totally dominating the position here. This is basically over if I don't blunder, and I proceed to blunder because he plays f5 here, which shouldn't be a good move. I can just close the position down with e5. I can play this bishop check. There's so many moves I can play to devastating effect here. And instead, I choose the move e takes f5, which is bad. And it's bad because I didn't even see the threat here. My opponent took back knight takes f5, and the only thing that I saw was that, okay, my bishop's hanging, but I have to keep this pawn defended. I just had tunnel vision for this little portion of the board here. So I thought, okay, once I get my bishop out of dodge, once I can just keep the pawn defended, and it's copacetic. And so I did that, completely hanging the fact that he can just take my rook. So the computer here says that the best move, that I'm still fine here. Actually, allowing the fork is no problem because I have this check. So it's actually not a fork because the king goes, somewhere, and I'm able to move the rook, and no worries here. All my problems are basically solved. So live and learn, but it was not my finest moment that I didn't see that the piece is just obviously hanging. I move the bishop away. He takes the rook. I take back. And what's interesting here is that the computer says the position is still equal. And whenever a player is up material, but they say that it's equal, I think that means that the position is incredibly difficult to play. So although I was really frustrated in this moment that I didn't see this obvious blunder, despite basically having dominated the game, I kept fighting, and he plays he plays king to f6. This is the part of the game where for some reason he runs toward the middle of the board with his king, like it's a king of the hill game. I played, oh, there's my cat. You want to say hi to the people, Bam? That's the chess kitty. This is the chess kitty. So I played G4 here, finally, like a million moves after I should have played G4 originally. And the idea here is just to maybe create a pass pawn on the H file, because I think it'll be sort of difficult to stop in the long run. But so we get take, and now these pawns can be somewhat menacing, I think, if they can find their way up the board. So he plays king to e5, winning king of the hill, but not developing either of the pieces that he really needs to develop. Bam is adding his annotations to the game, which I appreciate. This is an incredibly easy threat to parry, of course. I can just play... what did Bam do? I can just play... Oh no! Spoilers. I can just play bishop g3 check here, defending my rook and giving a check through the king. And I think he should have gone back here, but instead he wanders sort of further into the danger with king to e4. And at this point, I start to think, okay, this square is covered, this square is covered, this square is covered, covered. King only has these two squares down here. This square is also covered by the bishop. So what if I try to weave a mating net by moving my king to here and covering every square that the king has. So I do that. I move the king to d2. My opponent does not pick up on the threat, but does develop his bishop finally. And I move the king into place with e3. And at this point, I'm actually thinking it's mate in one. He's blown it, and I have every square for his king completely covered, and I win. But he found a pretty nice defense here with bishop to d5, which cuts my rook off and gives the king this d4 square. So even if I check him, he's going to go to d4. Now I did check him because I saw that this pawn was hanging in the distance, and also this pawn is now hanging. So I thought I could pick off this pawn, and then these two passed pawns on the fourth rank would roll up the board and could maybe produce a winning advantage. Something that I missed in this position, well, I'll talk about it later actually. So I played bishop takes, and it has the added benefit of coming with tempo here. So I thought that I could just come back into this position and maybe even continue my mating net idea. He moves the rook onto this open file, which I think is an okay move, although the rook is not really threatening to go anywhere useful. All these squares in my territory are covered, but what are you going to do? So I move the bishop back, and again, I think I'm threatening to take this pawn, although something that I saw at this point is that I'm actually threatening to trap this bishop because I can play pawn to c4, and the bishop can't move because it's pinned to the king backwards from the rook here. But the computer says it's actually a bad move, so say he plays like a nothing move like this, I can, even if I play this, apparently if he plays rook to b8 here, I can't take the bishop because he gives me a check, and because the king is covering the square here, I have to move back, and he can take the bishop anyway. So I don't actually win a piece, although I thought that I did. And I do wonder if my opponent would have found this. So instead, I think, well, why not just pick off this pawn here? When I return, he continues his king march for some reason. I think he's going after this pawn, and I think, go for it, man. I got better pawns and better business on this side of the board. He continues to attack the pawn on a3, and I thought this seems like a huge waste of time. So I move my pawn one square closer to promotion. He does take on a3 with his king, and at this point I thought, well, I can win this pawn with check, and I don't really want to mess with this pawn. He's got the same color bishop here. It's going to take a while for my bishop to well, I guess my bishop could defend the queening square and his queening square at the same time, but I don't know. I didn't want to mess with it, so I thought, okay, that's enough of this pawn. I take with check. He takes back, and at this point, I saw that I am going to actually struggle to push this move because he's got this check with the rook defending the bishop. But then I saw that his king and his rook are on the same diagonal, and I can skewer them. And so I thought, I was like, okay, well, if he doesn't address that threat, I'm just going to win the game. And he plays bishop f3 check, which I think is a bad move because if I can just stay attached to the bishop and I have the same threat here, and he can't move his rook actually anywhere useful along the f-file without me just winning the game because he needs to defend the queening square still. So, for example, if he goes here, I go here, he goes here, I go here, and I guess he can just take the pawn there. I can just defend. Oh yeah, he goes. Oh yeah, okay, sorry. So he goes. I go king e3. He goes. I go king e3. If he tries to stay attached to the bishop and he goes like king f6, I can just defend the pawn and take. No, that doesn't work. Okay, king f6, g7. Aha, yeah, right. Rook g6. I go bishop e5, defending the pawn. and then I can kick the knight out. I can kick the rook out and defend the queening square from behind, or even push the pawn. I don't think it's going to be possible for him to push the pawn, or for him to stop this pawn at this point. And he can't move away from the file because I take the bishop. So anyway, I thought that this was sort of a wasted check, and I thought keeping the bishop attached to the king was going to be the way forward. But I don't know why I just spent so long on that explanation, because he misses the obvious threat in the position, plays bishop to h5. I play bishop to d6, or skewering his king and his rook, and he can't do anything about it. He's going to lose the rook no matter where he goes with the king. Say here, I take the rook, even if he takes the pawn. And even if he takes the pawn, I'm more than capable of winning this. Takes, and this pawn is always going to be defended, and I can win the two bishop against king. Although, I don't know how to checkmate with two bishops, so maybe you should have played this through. Let me see let me see if there was a way for me to keep one more pawn on the board here with the best play. So I play check. He goes here. I wonder if it would be better for me to not take the rook, actually. So I take the rook. He takes the pawn. Yeah, I see. He can't stop both pawns. Yeah, because I can just take. So if he takes with the king here, then I'm just moving the pawn, and there's no way for him to defend this pawn, and he can't attack this pawn because it's on a dark square. So I can just defend both of the pawns by playing bishop here. Say he goes here, I can defend both of them. He can't never attack this pawn, even if he defends the queening square. Eventually, I'm getting my bishop into position where he can. Where I can, defend the queening square, or I can just use these pawns to defend each other. So I don't even have to checkmate with two bishops. The game's just over, and he knew that, and resigned the game after this move. So I did get the win. Definitely not a perfect game. Still got to learn some opening theory, I think, and improve my vision and awareness. But happy to see this sort of elementary tactic that ended the game, and it's just a good lesson. Negative lesson for my opponent, but still a good lesson that you can't waste time in the middle game, or else you will get just positionally overwhelmed. So yeah, this was the first video in the series. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more. I hope to suck a little less in the next video, both in terms of my play and my analysis. So I hope I am not sort of hoping in vain on that. All right, see you later.